This is Rick Wychick. Welcome back from your lunch, everyone. So to keep things moving ahead, I want to introduce the acting director of our Division of Extramural Research and Training, Dr. Pat Maston. So he will give us a report of the DERT group. Pat?
Thank you, Rick.
The podium is yours.
All right, let me get all set up here with my different things running. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for coming back so quickly. That was a great presentation that Rick gave, and I appreciate the questions and the responses that came through that. What I'd like to do now is to give you an update on some of the activities in the Division of Extramural Research and Training, also known as DERT, some of the things that have happened since the last time we met. And as you can imagine, there's been quite a bit. Let me see if I can advance slides. Look at that. Some of the things I'll be talking about, of course, we'll have to talk about COVID. That has occupied ours as well as a lot of people's time during the last 4 months. I will talk first at the NIH extramural level and then more down in the DERT level. Then I would like to talk about a very interesting collaboration that's going on between us and another institute related to a very unusual disease. And then I'd like to finish up with some of the DERT-related activities that have happened since Council met last and that will be happening between now and September Council. As you are aware, and as Rick has explained, NIH has been seriously geared up for the COVID-19 pandemic. Most of the activities, as Rick again mentioned, have been through the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID. And if you've watched TV much, you've seen Dr. Fauci on the news a lot. And as Rick mentioned, the various NIH institutes and centers have developed their own extramural and intramural research programs. And I'll mention some of ours a little bit later. But in addition, during this period, the NIH Office of Extramural Research, OER, has worked on a number of enhancements to the NIH policies to try to minimize burdens that have resulted from the pandemic on our grantees and applicants. Sorry. So OER provided us with some slides that we give for such presentations, such occasions as this. And some of the key points they want to mention are that, well, basically NIH is open for business, at least the extramural aspect. Our staff are all teleworking. We're processing applications, conducting reviews, and awarding grants. I will drill down a little bit more about how NIEHS is doing during this period, but for NIH as a whole, this is where we are. OER has established a website, which I'm showing here, that provides information for extramural community. It's being continuously updated. And as when I made this slide last week, the last update was May 28th. It was actually updated yesterday. Just couldn't update my slides as quickly. I'm going to hit a number of the highlights of things that you can find on this website. Here's the address down here, by the way. But I strongly recommend that if you have questions, you go check here first. And then if you have more specific questions, contacting us or whatever I see your grant is with. In the next few slides, as I say, I'm going to touch briefly on some of the extramural policies related to COVID, things that have happened since the COVID pandemic began. I want to recognize Jenny Greer, our Chief Grants Management Officer and Chief of our Grants Management Branch, for being our Chief Liaison to the Office of Extramural Research on matters related to grants policy. There have been a lot of changes that have happened very quickly and happened over and over. I think the general theme that OER is trying to express here is the need for flexibility. So some of the things that you can find by looking on the website relate to such things as application deadlines. There was a late application policy there you can find on the website. They also discuss issues related to salaries and stipends. If people can't go to work, can they still be paid off of the grants? In some cases they can. It really varies with the recipient's organizational policies. I refer you to this notice in the NIH guide for more information. And you should again also contact your IC, us for instance, and for more information specific for your situation. We also had a couple of our PIs ask, can they donate personal protective equipment or other research supplies to bolster the NIH COVID response? And the answer to that is in some cases you can. Again, you need to ask for specific questions to the institutes. Sorry. All right. Related to human subjects research, again, the theme here is flexibility, but more importantly, NIH and NIEHS want to ensure the safety of all human subject participants, as well as the research staff. So some of the flexibilities that have been established can be found, again, on this notice here. Similarly related to animal research, again, flexibility. We may be able to extend inspections up to 30 days and maybe conduct some IACUC meetings by virtually. And here's a reference that I would give you related to OER policy on that. There's another notice that I'll show you here that relates to general administrative flexibilities, including requirements for pre-award costs, extensions of post-award reporting, as well as prior approval requirements. Again, on a case-by-case basis, you should check with the grants management staff here if you have questions. And finally, NIH has addressed the issue of accommodations for loss of research time. If people can't get into the lab or into their workplace to do their work, and they're losing money and time, can they be compensated for that? The answer is maybe in some cases, but again, it's a very case-by-case thing, and it's important to check with us before you make any decisions about that. Okay, you can also find on this website some information, and Gwen referred to this a little while ago, about funding opportunities related to COVID for all of NIH. And these fundings usually, excuse me, related to competing revisions, administrative supplements, but also there are some new awards that are listed there. I want to stop right here and kind of define a term that is relatively new to NIH extramural world. It's called a Notice of Special Interest, or a NOSI. This was developed a few years ago, maybe even one or two, and it sort of replaces the IC specific program announcement. So all program announcements come centrally out of NIH now. If an institute wants to provide a specific special interest indication, they do it through the NOSI. So you'll be hearing that term over and over moving forward. So just to summarize, again, here's the website address if you have questions. If you have general questions, you can also email the grants policy at this address here. But as I've said several times now, for specific questions, you should contact the IC, in that case, in this case, NIEHS. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, DERT staff, like the rest of NIH, has been very active during this period. In many cases, really more so than during the when we were working full time, before we went on full-time telework. But gratefully, over the last several years, DERT has been enhancing its telework capabilities, mostly to be ready for weather events such as hurricanes or tornadoes. But the result has been that when the pandemic started, we were already geared up to continue operations at home. So our message is similar to NIHs in general. DERT is open for business. We've continued our usual activities with the addition of the COVID-19 activities thrown on top of that. For instance, our program staff has published and released, developed and published 5 funding announcements and 4 NOSIs, and more are in progress to be published soon. Some of these are COVID related, most of them are not. Likewise, our scientific review branch has worked hard to set up a number of review meetings. 15 are either been done or in the process of being done, in which 213 plus grants will be reviewed, as well as 1 contract proposed. These will all be and have been virtual meetings. And in some cases, there were meetings that were set up as face-to-face and had to be converted to virtual, which is an administrative issue for their branch. Likewise, our grants management branch has released at least 280 awards. This is a number from last week. It's probably higher now. This while they're fielding a myriad of COVID-related questions during this time. And finally, our program analysis branch has continued working on evaluations on several of our larger programs. They are working on strategic plan analysis, which I will tell you about at our next council meeting, I believe, as well as taking the lead on the enhancements to a number of our IT tools that we use for doing our business. So if you sense a little bit of pride in me when I say this, it's accurate. We've been working very hard and our staff has stepped up to the difficult situation, and we are continuing to get our work done. So more specifically, I want to mention a few things that we've done. First, I want to mention two NOEHS that have been released. Rick has referred to both of these, I believe. I also want to talk about a couple of interesting activities that two of our staff have been involved with, as well as talk a little bit about how we've adjusted to our new telework situation. So when the pandemic hit, a DERT staff immediately began thinking about how best to contribute to the research effort. Three things kind of naturally came to the top. This is certainly not exclusive by any means. The first one of these is the worker training program, and I'll talk about that in some detail in a minute. But also over the last several decades, as most of you know, and as Rick alluded to when he talked about the public health meeting that we had earlier, the PPH meeting, we've had a strong commitment to research that involves participation by communities. Other ICs have programs like this as well, but given our size, our investment is really larger relatively than most other institutes. As a result, several of our staff, including Liam O'Fallon, Lindsay Martin, Claudia Thompson, and Gwen Coleman, have contributed to several cross-NIEHS programs, lending expertise that they have about research on efforts to reach vulnerable populations. They've been very important to that activity. Rick specifically mentioned the RADx UP community-based demonstration projects that we have been involved with. Lastly, we have a very unique perspective on disease susceptibility by looking, of course, at environmental exposures. We have funded a number of research projects, including multiple ones that show that exposure to air pollution causes an increased susceptibility to respiratory viral infections. And Rick mentioned a very recent study indicating that that may be specific for COVID viral infection as well. In addition, we have supported research that shows that environmental exposures can reduce vaccine efficacy, which in this case could be very important as we try to move into our next phases of opening the country up and developing the COVID vaccine. So as a result, DRT has been heavily involved in developing our own funding opportunities, and along with Rick and Gwen and Aubrey Miller, who is our senior medical advisor in our Bethesda office, have been participating in a number of cross-NIH COVID-related activities. Rick alluded to some of these activities in his report, and now I want to provide some overview on a couple of our specific projects. Our largest and most visible COVID-19 related effort has been by our worker training program. Hopefully you're familiar with the program. Its core goal has always been to provide training to workers who are potentially exposed to hazardous materials in order, of course, to minimize exposure and reduce adverse health effects. By supporting grants to universities and colleges, to community groups, and to labor groups, the program has established a strong training, what I would call network. This allows the program to be very flexible and very responsive in emerging issues such as natural and man-made disasters, as well as pandemics. The program has been around for a long time, and in the beginning it focused primarily on exposures related to chemical waste or nuclear waste. But as you'll see here, in recent years they've expanded their focus to include infectious diseases as well. This includes work they have done related to viral outbreaks, including H1N1 and H5N1, but also programs looking at mold remediation following hurricane events. But in addition, in 2016, they expanded to include Ebola virus. They were awarded $9 million over a three-year period to develop an Ebola safety and infectious disease training response program. You can see, sorry. You can see what they did in this program. I won't read this, but they developed a program. They identified the targeted population that needed the training all the way through evaluation of the program itself. So, as I mentioned, the program is well positioned then to address this new COVID pandemic, being flexible and able to turn on the dime, as it were. I've included this slide here not to focus on the details so much, but to show that starting around the time of the first confirmed COVID case back in January, the worker training program identified the need for the training. They mobilized their network and began developing appropriate training programs. This held a number of virtual workshops and a number of regular meetings with their federal and non-federal partners. There are a couple of key issues they had to deal with, as you can imagine. I think the most important one of this is, how do you train people when it probably is not safe to put them in a classroom together? The answer, of course, is you need to develop an effective training, a virtual training platform. In addition, these are frontline workers with high risk exposure, and as we're all experiencing the stress related to COVID, there, of course, the stress is going to be higher. So the question is, how do you build the resilience training and social support into these training activities? Rick mentioned in his report that while the worker training staff was already working on this effort, Congress passed the first COVID-related bill in March. Most of the money for NIH went to NIAID, but seeing the value of protecting workers, they included $10 million, and I'm quoting here from the bill itself, for worker-based training to prevent and reduce exposure to hospital employees, emergency first responders, and other workers who are at risk for exposure to coronavirus through their work. So how has the money been used that we've received from Congress? Part of the money has been used to augment our regular training program grants. So if you're probably familiar, these grants are renewed every 5 years, and just coincidentally, this happens to be one of the 5 years for renewal. So some of the money was used to enhance the competing awards that are going to be awarded this summer, to add an infectious disease response or training component. These were reviewed by early concurrence, council concurrence, so that we can try to expedite the awards as quickly as possible. And thank you to council members who participated in this review. In addition, the worker training program released a notice of special interest, as you see here, for coronavirus and infectious disease response training. Some of the highlights of what they were hoping to do were provide support for worker training, worker-based training to prevent the exposure, to encourage development for, again, advanced training technologies for distance learning, since, again, you can't do typical classroom education, as well as to facilitate the implementation of the distance learning to get the training out to the workers who need it. The applications were received in April, and they're being reviewed, or have been reviewed internally. And meritorious applications will be awarded as quickly as we can get them out. Supplements were made not only to the centers, however, but will be made to some of our small business grants, which do e-learning grants as well. So, and I want to kind of finish up here by pointing to this resource that the worker training program has pulled together early in the pandemic event. They pulled from a number of resources, including CDC and WHO, to put together this training tool to help people get back into the workplace. It was originally designed for essential workers who are at greater risk and who would be going back to work early. But it is really generally applicable now, as so many of us employees and employers are wrestling with issues of how to get people back to the workplace. This training is available on the NIH public website, and I really strongly suggest that you take a look at it. There's a lot of really good information there. So I just want to acknowledge the people who have done the work. Chip is the director of the worker training program. The staff, Kathy, Sharon, Jim, and Demi, have done an incredible job of pulling together these programs during this time. So DERT also pulled together, developed and published a NOSI related to understanding how environmental exposures would impact the COVID susceptibility and severity. We have a unique approach, as I mentioned, in that we are looking at disease susceptibility from the point of view of how environmental agents could exacerbate COVID susceptibility. Some examples of the kinds of things we're interested in looking at were specifically how environmental exposures could enhance susceptibility by affecting, for instance, the immune function. As I've mentioned, we have shown that we have supported research that shows that environmental exposures can affect the immune system in adverse ways. We also were interested in how climate or weather-related factors could influence population susceptibility to the virus or to the disease. And finally, as Dr. Wright alluded to earlier, there have been some environmental changes that take place as a result of the COVID interventions. For instance, air pollution levels have gone down worldwide, of course, as a result of the physical distancing. How does that affect people's health? Is another question we have looked into. So the NOSI provided 3 ways in which funds could be requested. These are all existing funding announcements that we use in other cases. So for instance, administrative supplements are things we do every year many times. It's pretty much self-explanatory. It's supplemental funding to existing NIH grants. The caveats are that the new proposed research needs to be within the scope of the parent grant. But the good thing is that because they can be reviewed internally and don't require peer review, they can be adjudicated quickly and awards can be made in a quick time. We've talked in the past about our second mechanism here, the time-sensitive R21s. This is a program that we developed here within the last 10 years that is designed to award new grants, but by doing a rapid review and a rapid award, we can get them out in much faster time than the typical R21. So we can be responsive to emergency events. And the last one relates to what are called competitive revisions. These are similar to administrative supplements. The difference is that the proposed research can go outside the scope of the parent grant to some extent. They're typically, when we get these during regular times, these are reviewed by standard peer review. And but during this period of emergencies, these can be reviewed internally, and so they can be turned around and awarded more quickly. This program was actually developed 2 or 3 years ago when I think during the time of Hurricane Harvey and Irma and Maria to allow for faster turnaround. It is an NIH program. So applicants can apply to any of these mechanisms. So here's the timeline for these things. The NOSI was released in in April. The first available due date was May 1st. We will be having monthly receipt dates from the beginning of the month, like the first day. And this will be open through May of next year. So we had our second round were due yesterday, and we started receiving proposals already. I then want to just acknowledge the people who did this. This was a division-wide effort, but it was spearheaded primarily by Annika, and with help from Heather, Bonnie, and Shri. They did a lot of work to develop together ideas from the division and put them in a coherent fashion and get them into a NOSI that could be published in a fairly quick time. I now want to talk a little bit about, briefly about a couple of activities that 2 of our staff have been involved with. This involves deployment to the DHS Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, also known as ASPR. The staff members that participated in this activity were Nicole Popovich in our Office of the Director and Amanda Garten, who's in our Genes Environment Health branch. For Nicole's deployment, she worked with ASPR's Division of Recovery, and she was looking at DHHS funding that was received from Congress, such as through the CARES Act, and how this funding was being distributed. She developed a matrix that was used as a resource by the ASPR staff to assist FEMA in its efforts across the country. Amanda, on the other hand, worked for the Office of Data and Analytics, developing visualization tools through Tableau. These visualization tools helped ASPR focus on COVID-related testing at the state and county level nationwide. So very proud of the work they've done, and I'm pleased that they were able to help out in this way. So finishing up with COVID here, just to mention that how we have adapted to the new paradigm of COVID related working. In the past, an all-hands meeting was a sea of faces in a meeting room. This is now what an all-hands divisional meeting looks like. This is what a management staff meeting looks like, complete with a new mascot here. And as people working at home, they found their own assistants to help them do their job in their homes. And I include this to just remind us that extramural research does not always have to be a cat and mouse game. Sorry about that. And this is a picture from Janice Allen. I'm not sure what the squirrel is trying to convey here, but I kind of feel like we've all felt this way during this period. So, all right, I want to shift gears away from COVID now and talk about a collaboration that we've been involved in recently, dealing with an unusual disease known as chronic kidney disease of unknown origin, or CKDU. This is a collaboration that has involved NIEHS, as well as the National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive and Kidney Diseases, or NIDDK, as well as a number of other international organizations listed here. So what exactly is CKDU? What does it refer to? It's a pattern of endemic kidney diseases that are not explained by traditional etiologies, that are not explained by traditional risk factors, such as those listed down here. It's characterized by progressively declining glomerular filtration rate with no or mild proteinuria. And it's a tubulointerstitial disease as opposed to a glomerular process. And it occurs in poor agricultural areas in the tropics, such as in the Central America area or in Southern Asia. It affects mostly young agricultural workers, and there is an evidence of some family clustering. Sorry, there we go. Several workshops were held internationally to look at how best to move forward with research to try to address this unusual disease. Participation, our lead in this effort was Bonnie Jobert, who attended these meetings and, as you see, is co-authored on several of the reports of these meetings. Because of the lack of a thorough understanding of the disease, NIDDK and NIEHS, along with other ICs to some extent, have been working together to develop a series of FOAs to try to understand the etiology of CKDU. Since the etiology is not clear, there's a good chance that it might involve environmental exposures, and this is, of course, an avenue that we wish to explore. The name of this program is you can see is CKDU in Agricultural Communities, or CURE. And it will eventually consist of 3 RFAs listed here. These guide notices are what are called notices of intent to publish, and you can look at those now. They describe the program very briefly. The program will consist of these 3 RFAs, the first of which is for field epidemiology sites. These will be located in the endemic regions, and their role will be to recruit study participants and enroll them, and to collect data and samples from the subjects. The second RFA will fund the Data Science Coordinating Center, whose role will be the scientific leadership for study design, project and data management, as well as data analysis, and as a sample biorepository. The third RFA, and the third component of the program, will be the Renal Analytical Core, and this will provide scientific leadership in biological sampling strategies for the research project. Sorry, think about that. And finally, I'll mention that our human health exposure analysis research, or HERE, which we developed just last year, will be involved providing leadership in exposure analysis. They also provide guidance on study designs and sampling, as well as data collection for environmental exposures. Here are the people from the ICs who are involved, including NIDDK, Bonnie Gilbert from here, and then Fogarty International Center here. I want to wrap up by talking about a few activities that have happened since we last met in February, as well as some future events that are happening between now and September Council. As you can imagine, the number of events are fewer than we usually have because of the social distancing, but and many of these events are virtual. So as Rick mentioned, we had our PEPH meeting literally the day that the last council meeting occurred. Many of you attended, and thank you for that. In April, there was a meeting dealing with small business research, a town hall webinar, in fact, a virtual thing, that was involved with the development of new approaches and methodologies to reduce animal use and toxicity testing. More than 350 people registered, and 225 actually called in. It was a very successful meeting. Moving forward, we have several things planned for the summer. Our Course Center Directors meeting will be held in July. I believe that'll be a virtual meeting. And our ONCE meeting is being planned right now to be a virtual meeting as well. We have 2 cancer meetings that are coming up that we'll be involved in, one related to age-dependent changes in cancer biology, the other dealing with early onset colorectal cancer. Rhineland is our point of contact on these. These I think are currently scheduled to be face-to-face meetings, but I don't know if that'll change over time. And I don't have it on the list, but I just heard Gwen say earlier that the ISE meeting will be happening between now and September as well. So with that, I will finish up and say thank you, and I will be glad to address any questions that I can, or if I can't answer, we will find the right person that can. So thank you. Now I'm going to see if I can find, are there any questions? I'm looking to see if there are any hands being raised. Anything in chat, questions from the chat group. If not, I guess we're ready to move on to our next, the next part of our program. What we have next is a concept that will be presented by Amanda Garden in the Genes and Environment and Health branch, dealing with some new short course things that we are proposing to support. This being a concept, we will need to have a vote at the end of this, a vote for concept clearance. So do we have Amanda available?
I am right here.
Okay, your slides are pulled up. So I will let you go ahead and proceed then.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here as Pat mentioned, to present a concept for a training program to enhance the skills of researchers and broaden access to training in emerging topics and modern methods and tools for environmental health sciences through the use of short courses. There we go. So the seed of this idea came from several sources, and over the past couple of months, I've spent a fair bit of time looking into, one, what is the need that we're trying to address, and two, are short courses a good option for filling those gaps? And to that first point, there have been several direct inquiries about specific areas that extramural researchers feel could benefit from short courses. And in exploring options, I found that currently there are limited formal opportunities for short-term training in environmental health sciences. The best example of which is the Skills for Health and Research Professional training program, SHARP, at Columbia University, which hosts a series of boot camps and workshops on a range of topics, including environmental health research-centered skills, such as environmental mixtures and exposomics. And like the SHARP program courses, other training opportunities are primarily limited to these shorter workshops rather than longer or more immersive trainings. I also found in talking to program staff here at NIEHS that we are able to identify specific populations as well as scientific areas that could benefit from increased access to skills training in a range of environmental health science topics. And for that second point, are short courses an opportunity to address these gaps? Well, I think I found some evidence that they are. And one of the ways I did that is I spoke to program staff at other NIH institutes and centers about the strengths and weaknesses of their short course programs and how they use them to support their institute's mission. And all of those conversations have really influenced the program I'm describing to you today. The goals of this program are really simply to help researchers go from incremental progress to running and even leaping ahead by providing training and using cutting-edge methods, approaches, and techniques. And secondly, to make training in these topics available to a broad audience of researchers, particularly those at smaller or less research-intensive institutions. And mission-wise, this fits well within Strategic Plan Theme 3, Enhancing Environmental Health Sciences through Stewardship and Support. It addresses Goal 1, the professional pipeline, and that short courses could help build a workforce that is highly qualified in the use of cutting-edge knowledge, technologies, and approaches, as well as Goal 2, greater workforce diversity, by ensuring widespread opportunity and inclusion in our training programs. NIEHS does support a lot of training and career development programs. As you can see, we are good at supporting training in the context of research from across the career span, with programs targeted at high school and college students through to independent investigators. And we also support the wide dissemination of new tools and research through our conference and workshop programs. But there are some limitations in these. Most mechanisms require a long-term commitment, both by and to the participants. Many are very specific for career stages, and our conferences and workshops generally don't include hands-on training. So short courses could be a way to address these challenges by systematically making brief, intensive, hands-on training opportunities in environmental health sciences available to a wide range of researchers. Specifically, if we think that there are currently there are limitations by the need for a long-term commitment, short courses can be less than 1 month in person. And if our programs tend to be specific for a career stage, well, short courses are open to participants from across the country and career span. And our conferences and workshops generally don't have hands-on training, but we can require that lab component in addition to lectures in a short course. So short courses could be complementary to our existing training and career development programs. And so I'm presenting and that was kind of what guided the program staff and I when we were thinking about what are some areas where there is clear need to support hands-on training and advanced method. And here are some examples that really highlight the diversity of research areas that could be covered by short courses. And by no means is this list exhaustive or all-inclusive. It ranges from concepts for studying emerging and or high priority chemicals to employing novel techniques or models to investigate the impacts of environmental exposures on health or building effective community engaged research programs. And these courses could really be relevant to researchers across the environmental health sciences. And I want to specifically call out modernizing neurotoxicology. This is an area that is near and dear to the Genes, Environment, and Health branch, of which I'm a part, but it also shows how short courses could be particularly useful in areas that the Institute has identified as a priority for cross-cutting activities. So how would we structure this program? Well, the program that I'm calling NIEHS Research Intensive Short Courses and Educational Opportunities, NIEHS RISE, would support short courses with intensive hands-on training open to national participation. And rather than focusing on a specific area of science, what would tie the courses funded by this program together thematically is the emphasis on courses that teach skills in emerging topics and training in cutting-edge tools, methods, and approaches for environmental health sciences. And these should really be skills that researchers need to take their work to the next level and push the various fields of environmental health sciences forward. And the final point I want to make is that to better enable scientists to apply their new skills and to ensure that time during in-person short courses is focused on that hands-on practical training, we would like to encourage the use of innovative educational models and methods, such as experiential or project-based learning, or virtual and remote tools to enhance the training experience. I think now, in this time, we can all see the value of these more virtual and remote options. So my proposal for the NIEHS RISE is to use the R25 research education mechanism to support courses for skills development, which are advanced courses in a specific discipline or research area, clinical procedures for research, or specialized research techniques. And this mechanism has been used by other NIH institutes and centers for similar short courses and research education programs. Notably, the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, NINDS, and the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, NICHD, who both have long-standing programs that are quite similar to what I'm proposing here. And at NIEHS, we have used the R25 for multiple different training programs, including the Undergraduate Research Education Program to enhance diversity in the environmental health sciences, the Superfund research programs, occupational health and safety education programs on emerging technologies, which Dr. Sook may discuss as part of his update, and as part of the NIEHS program to support training and workforce development in environmental health data concept presented at January Council. But what makes NIEHS RISE unique and distinct from these other programs is the focus solely on short courses for skills development across a wide range of environmental health sciences, rather than using multiple strategies, such as mentoring or curricular development, to target a specific field or population of researchers. So that's really a lot about kind of the big picture of what would be in this program. But what could these actual short courses look like? And I've come up with a couple of potential models and structures that could fit within this program. At the heart, all the courses need are a combination of hands-on and didactic training during a relatively brief in-person experience. Your classic short course format where you balance your time between lectures and labs. But they could also leverage online resources such as massively open online courses, MOOCs, or webinars to prepare participants for the in-person course or to reinforce what they've learned at their home institutions. They could also incorporate additional elements such as project-based work that begins before or continues beyond the course, or an online networking or virtual mentoring programs to support participants as they adopt what they've learned into their research programs. And there are likely other resources or models that we haven't considered that would match well with different areas of research to enable participants to truly adopt and apply what they've learned. And I have two examples of programs that have been supported by R25 awards that I would like to describe to you. And I chose these two examples because they represent extremes in terms of the science and in terms of the structure. This first example is a classic short course from Cold Spring Harbor Labs on metabolomics. And when we first started talking about intensive short courses, this is probably what you're thinking of. It's about a 2-week course that combines lab sessions with didactic learning, integrating both a theoretical and nuts and bolts training. And I chose this course to highlight because while this topic is relevant to many of our researchers, the focus on the broader field of metabolomics may mean that environmental health-related nuances are less well covered, which is a potential gap area that NIEHS in this program could fill. This course receives support from multiple federal, nonprofit, and industry sponsors, including as a component of an innovative program to enhance research training, IPERT award, which is a broader R25 grant from the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, NIGMS. Sadly, 2020 was actually canceled due to coronavirus. The second example, however, is on the opposite end of the spectrum from the Cold Spring Harbor course, both thematically and in terms of structure. For the enhanced program, participants are team pairs who are seeking to develop stronger partnerships and advanced skills in community-based participatory research. And in addition to the in-person intensive training, the CBPR Partnership Academy uses multiple strategies to help keep participants engaged, such as online learning forums and expert mentoring to reinforce the skills taught in the course, as well as proposal development and funding for participant teams to actually apply their new skills. And the R25 grant that supports this course was recently actually transferred to NIEHS, highlighting that there are areas of environmental health sciences that are already seeking out ways to support these kinds of short courses. So getting even further into the details, what does it actually take to put together one of these courses? Well, if you think about what it would take to plan a workshop or a meeting, but larger, you can see how they can easily cost upwards of $200,000. In addition to labor costs, there are considerations of space and allowable equipment and supplies, both for hands-on and theoretical components, as well as costs for the national participants. And some of these costs may be defrayed, if needed, by registration fees. But to ensure diversity and access for a wide range of participants, there may need to be options for per diem, travel awards, or need-based scholarships. Another component of this award would need to be evaluation. It would need to be built in at multiple levels. Each award needs to continuously evaluate, both to improve instruction and also to incorporate new material so that what they cover in their courses stays relevant and useful for their participants. And secondly, as a new program, we at NIEHS will need to think about and plan for how we will measure the success and impact of this program. So what would this cost for NIEHS? Well, I am proposing that each award would be up to $200,000 direct cost per year for 5 years, with facilities and administrative costs capped at 8%. And courses may charge registration fees as well as request funds for scholarships. And I would like to fund 2 to 3 new awards each year for 3 years to allow for a range of awards that reflect the diversity of NIEHS supported research. And for our timing, we would hope to have an FOA published in the late summer, early fall of 2020, with a receipt date by the end of the year and awards in early fiscal year 2022. So lastly, I do want to acknowledge all those who have helped and given me feedback as I developed this concept, starting with everyone in the Genes, Environment, and Health branch, particularly Drs. Mike Humble and Cindy Lawler, as well as the DERT staff, including, but not limited to, Jenny Greer, Bonnie Joubert, Alfonso Latoni, Liam O'Fallon, Dan Shaughnessy, and Carol Schreffler, and also the staff at other NIH institutes and centers who generously answered all the questions I had about their short course programs, notably Dr. Stephen Korn at NINDS and Dr. Dennis Tingley at NICHD. All of them really helped me in refining and clarifying the concept that I presented today. And with that, I would like to turn it over to my council reviewers, Dr. Edith Parker and Dr. Sue Shantz.
Thank you, Amanda. Edith, would you like to lead off our discussion?
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I thought that was a great presentation, so thanks for that. I should say I'm really supportive of this concept. I think it addresses identified need amongst environmental health investigators for whom difficulties do arise when there's cutting edge methods. I think there's few ways, particularly for those in academia, to really pursue training that they might not have got previously in their formal training. And, you know, even sabbaticals, which might be a mechanism for further training, or shrinking in number and duration. And I think many state-supported schools are few and far between. And I like that it allows NIEHS to come in line with some other NIH agencies who have the same mechanism. I think it also may really help enhance some interdisciplinary aspects of research depending on the topic, but it might be that a lab scientist takes a course in CBPR and is much more conversant in that and working with colleagues and community members. I really am like the hands-on experiential focus of it, the mixture of in-person, online experience in the longer time period than some of our traditional workshops or boot camps. I think the funding that sounds very reasonable, and particularly like that both the breadth and diversity of potential topics that were mentioned, and it seems like this will allow for that, as really, I think, the potential of this program to assist with greater workforce diversity in this whole country and in environmental health is really a great potential in the sense that it really could have impact with faculty at less resource-rich undergraduate institutions who could then benefit from that in terms of passing along those skills to their students. So just a few suggestions. One is that I think that I'm wondering if there might be ways, and this would be for each individual applicant to determine, but if they had other NIEHS research career support or training, if there might be ways to integrate those. I'm thinking that probably some of the trainees with on Ks or even Ts may actually have the skill set, even though they're being trained on others, to contribute on these short courses, and it might be a really good experience for them going further when they become a professor. Now, obviously, we would want that to be within the appropriate expertise and guidelines of the training mechanism. I think evaluation, I really would challenge you to think about ways that we might be able to really kind of track how people use these skills. Having myself been to some more short camp courses or boot camps, sometimes I come out with that knowledge, but don't really apply it going forward. So I think as much as we could, maybe have a longitudinal design to see what people actually do with this knowledge they pick up. I think the only other was just some sort of a definition of what criteria we would use to ensure diversity of participants in the actual training, and not just individual characteristics, but also that there be diversity of institutions that might take a part of that. But in ending, I'll say I really am supportive and really appreciate the good thought that's gone into this. And I'll turn it over to Susan.
Thanks. So Edith gave a really thorough overview, so I don't have a ton to add. I'll just say that I'm really, really excited about this program. I just love this proposal, and I think it's going to be a great opportunity. As the director of a T32 for almost 20 years, I can just think about how excited pre and postdocs in our training program would be to be able to participate in something like this. And one of the things that I really like about it is the mix of different career levels and the opportunities that that would allow for mentoring and networking for people at different levels within the group over the period of training. I just think bringing a bunch of people together from across the country, from lots of different types of institutions at lots of different career levels, really creates also an excellent opportunity to build collaborations. And I can see people going away from a training program like this with plans for collaboration with people they've met that have similar but complementary interests that they've met within the program. So I'm excited about it. I like it a lot. I'm glad that there's strong evaluation component of this that you've spoken about. I think that you might have to be flexible with how much of it is online, depending on what the future brings. But it sounds like that's already part of the planning. Let's see, I think that covers my comments. Just very positive about the program.
Thank you both. And I think those bring up good points that we're definitely considering and, wrapping our heads around as we try to integrate those kinds of, those thoughts and those kinds of flexibilities.
Okay, thanks to Edith and Sue. Are there any other council members like to provide comments, ask questions of Amanda, provide feedback? All
I,
right.
I see Robin Tanguay's hand is up.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I agree with the reviewer's comments. And I'm highly supportive, but I do have some questions on whether in the development that you thought about um, more of an externship model. So if you think about the success of the Casey Donnelly program and the SRP, where a lot of the cost of the training is offset by the host, the mentors, and then you just have a limited investment to get folks into the best labs that we have in these research areas. And would that be an alternative way of getting a bigger impact of an investment, is to have a coordinated network of experts across the country and then, pull them from a diverse sector of the country to get them into these labs doing state of the art. I guess the reason I bring that up is that in efforts of having state of the art activities, but then you have a consolidated training opportunity, then you somewhat limit, because your funding is limited, the types of state of the art techniques you can um, teach. You know what I'm saying? So would an externship model work? Oh,
I I think one of the things about, one of the opportunities that I think a short course program has that um, might be a little bit easier. One, I think they might be a little bit short. The courses themselves might be a little bit shorter than an externship might be. And the other thought about this is that, there's some, maybe some economies of scale by having the centralized defined course that you can bring in a full cohort to take, and you can run multiple times where it's kind of, you have a set course and a set skill. And I think that's also one of the reasons why I wanted this to be a multi-year program, is to really make sure we can balance and get a range of skills training, and trying to make sure that we are hitting the range and the breadth of what NIEHS supports. That addresses your question.
yeah, thank you.
Now I'll unmute myself again and say, any other questions? I don't-
Katrina Korfmacher, I think, has a question.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Katrina.
Yeah, thanks. So I also agree with the reviewers and the generally positive responses to this. I think it's a really promising proposal, and I particularly appreciate your inclusion of a wide range of examples and skill sets and what you're, thinking of this for supporting. I was also really intrigued by your thoughtfulness about evaluation, and encourage you to think carefully about how that's going to reflect some of the things that you stated as the program. So, for example, if part of the goal is to promote equity and inclusiveness and expanding workforce in different dimensions, how are you going to capture that in terms of evaluation? A second is, we're really pretty good at measuring the impacts on people's future funding and papers that come out of things, not so good at the more indirect impacts. And I think this might be a really great opportunity to institutionalize social network analysis and build up the Institute's capacity in using that to broaden the scope of things that we measure. If you're going to do that, I really encourage you to think about mechanisms for post-program support, because doing that kind of evaluation is a significant burden on both the hosts and the participants, not in perpetuity, but as you're watching them, and having some sort of support that goes along with that so that people aren't essentially deterred from doing this because you'll be all in their business from then on forever. And then finally, as we're thinking about in-person versus remote opportunities, I think the opportunity to interact in person is really important and great, and particularly in the realm of hands-on experiences. But if you include calculation of greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with those two different options, so that people really internalize those costs, I appreciate that.
I would like to see. I would hope applicants consider some of those thoughts and how they would address that.
Okay, anything for Terry? Looks like you're got a hand raised. And you're on mute, Terry. There
Okay.
you go.
Yeah, so a wonderful program. I'm also very highly supportive. What I'm wondering is whether or not there will be opportunities for applicants to also add into the mix, I guess, some additional funding from private partners or from professional societies to help to augment the budget for this program.
I think we'd have to look into what would need to be done for that. But as I mentioned, the Cold Spring Harbors courses, they receive funding from multiple sources.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Mhm. Anything else? Seeing no electronic hands raised, I will ask then for a motion to approve this concept to move forward. Somebody will need to unmute and do that.
So moved.
Okay, can I have someone give a second?
I second.
Terrific. Okay, if you will please vote in your electronic council book, I would appreciate it. And Liz, let me know when the voting is complete.
Okay.
All right, looks like everyone had voted. Thanks, Amanda. I appreciate that. We're running a fair bit ahead of schedule, surprisingly. I want to make sure Bill Sook is still with us. Bill, can you weigh in if you are?
I am here.
Excellent. Are
I
you
now
ready?
have internet.
Yay, terrific. And now you have a presentation coming up shortly.
Okay.
All right. Our last,
Whoops.
I
need
no,
to
you're
go.
good. We're seeing you just need to click on use your cursor and click on there you go. Okay.
All right. Wait a minute. I want to go back.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway,
I can't see it. Okay.
there you go. So our last item of the day, Bill Sook is going to provide an overview of the Superfund research program. We haven't had one of these in a while, and they have done a lot of neat things since the last update. And so, Bill, I will turn the virtual floor over to you.
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate it. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to provide you first with a broad overview of the Superfund research program, its various components, and how it supports multi-interdisciplinary research and training. Then I'm going to remind you of the changes that took place a few years ago with regards to the P42 Centers Program review cycle and who we supported in the first round, followed by, which is an update, and followed by who we are supporting right now, which was approved at the last council. Finally, I'm going to give you an idea of the diversity of the research and that we support, the importance of data science, and how it is transforming our ability to address complex environmental health science problems. Whoops. There we go. Okay, so this is the immediate staff of the program. It is a team effort. And speaking of team efforts, this is the other part of the team, which is grants management, all the people involved in grants management, and in the most recent review. I want to mention that Leroy Worth and Linda Bass have been involved in the previous reviews of the program. Okay. So these are our mandates, essentially, not essentially, these are our mandates. And I'm not going to read them off to you specifically, other than to point out that the number 4, the one that's focused on, says remediation, which is basic biological, chemical, and physical means to reduce the amount of hazardous substances, toxicity of hazardous substances. This is unique to NIH. Our legislation requires that we support different disciplines of research, the geosciences, environmental engineering, ecology. I also want to point out that the full title of this program is the NIEHS Basic Research and Training Program. We support fundamental research addressing each one of these mandates that are listed here. Also, I want to point out, interestingly enough, when you go back in the history of the legislation, it uses the word hazardous substances over and over. Nowhere does it mention hazardous waste. This gives us a broader mandate than just quote unquote focusing on hazardous waste. So it gives us an opportunity to look at emerging chemicals. And we also are required not to be a site-specific program. These are the various mechanisms. I'm going to focus in a few minutes mostly on the P42s, but we just had a discussion about the R25 that Amanda did a great job on. We have an R25 program within this the Superfund research program. And we also have an R01 program as well as these other mechanisms. The R25 program and the R01 program, you all approved as concepts in the last council meeting that we had. And so that you know that both of these mechanisms are, actually the R01 is in the process. They're going to be reviewed this summer. And the R25 is on the street. So again, just as a brief synopsis, just as a reminder, the R25 program, let me see, the R01 program focused specifically on utilizing innovative material sciences approaches to enhance bioremediation. Again, going back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago, we have a very unique mandate number 4. This helps us focus on satisfying that mandate. It's also embedded within the P42 program, but at the same time, it allows us to explore basic mechanistic understanding of the effectiveness of bioremediation technologies. In this case, we're also looking at novel material approaches. And again, we're looking at emerging and recalcitrant hazardous substances and complex mixtures. The R25 program is to develop and offer continuing education courses on, again, on emerging technologies, on emerging contaminants, as well as on disaster responsiveness. Okay, so this is where we are in the country, and this is Puerto Rico down here, by the way. Although the program is not site-specific, according by our legislation, there are programs that are doing research on specific sites. And because the assumption here is the presence is that research that's taking place on arsenic, for example, in Arizona, is applicable and generalizable to other parts of the country where arsenic is a significant problem. I'm just using that as an example. So the P42 mechanism is a collaborative science approach to addressing problems, significant problems. The research and training, there's a requirement for research translation. There's a requirement for community engagement. We also now, within the new program, and I'll get to that in a few minutes, we have a data management and analysis core, or DMAC, and we have a requirement for training as well. But these give you the idea as to the types of centers that we support, that they are highly integrated and they address a problem and try to come up with solutions to solve that particular problem. So environmental health has been challenged to focus on a broad array of mixtures. and to develop an understanding of continuum from exposure to disease outcome. Superfund research program is designed to be able to break that link to allow for technologies and fundamental research to reduce exposures and thereby reduce disease outcome and improve health. And we do this again through the 4 basic mandates that we have, and that's the way we approach this particular problem, these problems. So I found this to be pretty interesting, actually. This is a journal landscape map which helps visualize the multidisciplinary nature of the SRP research that we support. The map shows the journals that SRP-funded articles are published in, grouped in different topics, with biomedical research clustered to the left and environmental science and engineering to the right. Findings cover research in the fields of epidemiology, health effects, mechanistic toxicology, fate and transport, remediation, and ecological studies. The circle size is determined by the number of articles in each journal. The circle that are closer together when articles have shared references. And the colors indicate clusters formed by related journals. So keep an eye on this. And when, oops, okay. Okay, there we go. What we did here is we looked at the years 1995 to 2000, and we came up with 1,500, a little bit over 1,500 articles or as association. This is a hard visualization. We took anyway, it's just to you need to get an idea about how these things clustered during that. We then expanded that to include 95 to 2018. And what it shows is that the number of journal articles increased significantly, obviously. And it also showed, you see a lot more nodes in the second map, indicating that the SRP researchers have expanded their research within these broader disciplines over time. This is an important visualization because it demonstrates how people are beginning to work together, or how people are working together, and how they're being able to do this within the context of the 4 mandates, and to be able to do it in a way that allows for questions that could not be answered individually to be answered by any individual discipline. So the overall approach here is you have this unifying theme, and you have different research activities taking place that are biomedical research and environmental sciences and engineering research. But data science fits squarely within this, training fits squarely within this, as does community engagement and research translation. So the overall system requires that it be integrated within a center and work to address related problems. Whoops, something just happened. Okay, whoop, let me go back. I clicked it too much, sorry. All right, so we view SRP research as if one was looking through a systems lens, a systems approach lens. Our mandates encompass broad transdisciplinary research that also requires integration of translation, community engagement, and training. The findings that we're coming up with, or that we're looking at, those, by the way, are our 4 mandates, indicate that there is significant amount of science and research activities, training activities taking place at the different boundaries. Remember the 2 graphs from before. These boundaries are allowing us to develop tools and answer questions that could not be addressed before. So we look at this as a systems approach that can encompass and focus on the complexity, take advantage of the complexity of the system and still solve problems. Training is vital to the program. It's as simple as that. We have supported over 2,250 trainees over the years. It broadens our trainings. In the previous discussion by Dr. Tangway, that there was a question about the KC Donnelly. This is the KC Donnelly. It allows researchers, I'm just using this as an example, it allows students, trainees, to go from one place to another and be trained in new tools and new techniques. They can go to another university within the system. They can go to labs. They can go to ATSDR. They can go to EPA. They can go to NIH. The whole idea is to provide these trainees with a unique opportunity to go and grow beyond their own specific university. Nothing wrong with that, but they need to be able to do that. So research begins, the PAC, the research begins with basic research. There's a basic research program, fundamental research that generates new ideas, principles, and theories and plays a role in research translation. It's all combined, it's all clicking together. We have a very good approach as to how we're trying to look at this. It informs the development because the research that we support and the training that we support through these different approaches and different mechanisms informs the development of policies and allows for interventions to take place to reduce exposures and thereby reduce disease burden. We encourage accurate and timely use of research outcomes. Research translation, which we communicate and facilitate research findings and technology transfer. We require that people share information in a bidirectional, a multi-directional way that allows for the researchers and the community stakeholders to work together in a way that actually benefits both. And both of these, research translation and community engagement, are collective in that they are designed to use the information that comes from the programs to answer questions and address issues. So that was the broad overview part. And now I'm going to give you an idea about who we're funding and at this point in time. So just to bring you up to date, because most of you were not on council when we started down this road a few years ago, but in 2016, we changed the review cycle. We used to do a review every year for a 5-year award. And for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that a review of this program is expensive. And we felt that it was important to be able to use some of the resources that were being used to review the applications to actually change the cycle to allow for us to spend the money, especially considering that we have been fiscally flat for a number of years, in a much more productive way. So we changed the review cycle for a variety of reasons. Budget improvement, take advantage of additional mechanisms. We did fold in the R25 at around that time. We've always had an R01 program, but it allows us to take advantage of some of the other mechanisms that are available out there should we need them. And I'll get to that in a minute. So this is what it looks like, or what it looked like. Awards for 5 years. We started in 2016, 2017. These awards that are on the first track that were funded 2 years ago will continue through 2022. We're in the process of writing the RFA or updating the RFA for that first track. The second track is what I'm going to discuss with you right now. So essentially what it is that we have two cohorts, each on a 5-year cycle with a 2.5-year break between them. So that's asynchronous in their approach to how to be able to address some of these issues. So the first centers that we supported in the cohort, Duke, looking at development exposures, mechanisms, outcomes, and remediation. MIT, I'm not going to go through this because at the very end, I'm going to give you a link and you can be able to look at all the information you ever want to ask about this program. Texas A&M, which was new at the time. It's a new program that came in at that point in time, as was MIT at that point. UC Berkeley, UC Davis, they've been around for a while. UC San Diego, University of Louisville was new at the time, as was New Mexico, as was Rhode Island. Rhode Island is an interesting, they're all interesting programs, but Rhode Island is an interesting program because it focuses primarily or specifically on PFAS. University of Washington, which has been around for a while with different directors. And now we get to the second group. So we have the first 10 that came in, and now we have the next 11 that came in for a total, obviously, of 21 centers. So the new ones that are funded now, which is what you all approved at the last council in February, Baylor College of Medicine is looking at PAHs and preterm birth, chronic lung disease, and neurocognitive defects. Harvard School of Public Health is looking at metal and metal mixtures and their relationship to cognitive aging. LSU, which is looking at environmentally persistent free radicals, otherwise known as EPFRs, which induce pulmonary and cardiovascular dysfunction. And they're looking at how they're formed and how they can limit that exposure. This is an interesting program, I think. It is kind of new in that it existed before under previous leadership under Barry Dellinger, who passed away and has been taken up by Steph Comier. LSU, North Carolina State University, again, an entire program focusing totally on PFAS exposure and mechanisms of thyroid and immune functioning with regards to PFAS exposures. So these are new. And then we have Northeastern, which is focusing on chemical mixtures and preterm births primarily in Puerto Rico. Oregon State University, longstanding program also, that's looking at PAHs, lung toxicity, and developmental effects, looking at real-world mixtures of PAHs as well. University of Alabama, Birmingham, which is a new program, looking at air pollution with heavy metals and its impact on asthma, COPD, and lower respiratory infections. University of Arizona, which is looking at arsenic in water and dust primarily from mining sites, and looking at gut microbiome changes and development of diabetes in their populations. And then we have University of Iowa, which has a new PI, Kerry Hornbuckle. University of Kentucky, looking at neurodevelopmental outcomes and metabolic effects, specifically with regards to PCB emissions. University of Kentucky, the effects of nutrition and exercise on PAH, on PAHs for the most part, including cardiovascular risk and obesity, and tools to reduce those exposures, specifically in rural, very low income populations in Kentucky. And the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is essentially a new program under the directorship of Rebecca Fry. At this point, Jim Swinburne has stepped aside, and it went through a hiatus and refocused itself, looking on inorganic arsenic and mechanisms underlying arsenic-induced, metabolic dysfunction, obesity, and diabetes. So that's the group that you had pulled together the last time. Now, when you have two cohorts, and the RFA and you need to figure out how to be able to connect the two cohorts. And the way we've done this is to do it through data sharing. So SRP generates an incredible amount of data through biomedical research, environmental sciences and engineering, and other types of research. We're trying to pull together new scientific connections on this, and to integrate and reuse data. Researchers are harmonizing data workflows that are consistent with being able to be good stewards and data sharing amongst different programs. So the new program has a DMAC, an entire core dedicated to data management. The previous program, the first cohort, did not. However, I believe that Michelle Heacock discussed a lot of this at the last council meeting, but the point is that the change in the way we did the review cycle allowed for us to have availability of funds that was a direct result of that change in order to put additional resources back into the program to enable these programs to actually connect the two cohorts between the first 10 and the next 11. The idea here is to be able to actually take advantage of what is taking place with data science, which for this program is very transformative in its ability to address specific questions. So it also fits within the overall NIEHS strategic plan for promoting promoting translation, data knowledge to action. Again, Michelle mentioned this in the last council, but I just wanted to mention that what we're doing with regards to data science within the SRP is we are addressing questions that can't or are not being addressed by 1, 2, or even 3 research domains. The data science initiative is a model for how to be able to query data, a variety of platforms of data, in order to answer questions that cannot be answered by 1 discipline or even 2 disciplines alone. Remember the visualization map from a few slides back that talked about how all of these research programs are the research that's being published is being published in journals that are now being shared one with the other. This is the direction that we're heading in, and it fits squarely within the NIEHS strategic plan. We also are participating in the HERE program, the Human Health Exposure Analysis Resource, and which is the goal is to provide infrastructure for adding or expanding exposure analysis to advance understanding the impact of environmental exposures on human health through the life course. And this gives you an idea as to the 2 organizations, Mount Sinai in New York, looking at untargeted analysis of biological samples, and Duke University here in North Carolina, looking at environmental sampling analysis. So the Superfund Research Program, is essentially, because this is a trans NIH activity, is essentially a mini IC, if you will. If you have any questions or more questions about this, you can talk to David Balshaw, who's director of the program, or Michelle Heacock, who is the Superfund liaison for the HERE program. We are viewing what we're doing with regards to data science and the data science initiatives, linking it squarely with the HERE program, because the whole idea is to be able to pull in as much data as we possibly can from a variety of sources, again, to answer hard questions that cannot be answered on their own. So I will tell you that if you want to learn more about what I've just said, or you want some very specific details about what we're doing, these are the websites. These are the links within the SRP homepage. It looks at public health impacts, training, what we're doing in training, what we're doing with regards to research briefs, data sharing, risky learning. And I will point out that we are in the process. We now have 2 more sessions, and these are archives, so you can go back and listen to the others. We do a risky learning at least twice a year, usually twice a year in the fall and the spring. And the spring series is looking at exposures and latency of disease. The issue here is a simple question, a very hard question to answer, and that is exposure to disease takes a long time. How do you get a better understanding of this latency period in order to close that link between what people are exposed to and how to be able to reduce that exposure by intervening or preventing that exposure, and thereby reducing that latency period or eliminating the latency period. So that's where we're at right now. And so there's a variety of links for your enjoyment. And with that, I want to thank you. And these are the different areas of research that the program supports. And the whole intent is to improve public health. And I just wanted to say thank you for your time, and just wanted to bring you up to date on it. If you have any questions, you can get up with me. And again, thank you and stay safe.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Any council members have any questions? We're watching the participants list for the electronic hand being waived. Bill did a great job of summarizing a lot of information. This program is very active and a lot goes on. Appreciate his taking some time to bring us all up to date. I know we have a number of members of council who are associated with Superfund program. If you have anything you'd like to add, please do that as well. If there are any questions from council, we would entertain those, I believe. I'm not seeing any. All right, well, if no one has anything further, I'll thank you, Bill. Appreciate that update. We do have one last thing we're going to add to the agenda real quick. Rick wanted to have one more slide added, and so John, can you load that slide up for us if you're available? Okay. And Rick, did you want to take it?
Thanks, Pat. And I just want to apologize to all of my colleagues on the working group for the ICDA. I don't know what happened in the production of the final slide that I showed this morning, but somehow all the names above K were deleted in the process of editing the slides. So this is a slide that shows the complete working group here at the NIEHS, who have been working hard to put fingers to the keyboard and helping to create that white paper on the ICDA. So I'm terribly embarrassed that I didn't catch the error before I showed the slide this morning, but you can see all of the people who have been working hard on this. So I want to thank my colleagues for that. And again, I just apologize for the error. So Pat, I think we're just about winding things up. Is that right? Pat, you're on mute. No, you're still on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. I think I'd be getting used to this by now. I just wanted to say thank you for council members for participating in this new venture. Like I say, we may be doing this again for September council. We just don't know yet. Appreciate your patience and your willingness to do it this way. I also want to thank our speakers, Rick, Bill, Amanda, and me, I guess, for presentations. I especially want to thank Liz McNair for her efforts. If any of this works, it's because Liz does it directly or makes sure that I do it correctly, as well as Rose Moody, who assisted Liz and me on doing this. Big old shout out to John Maruka and Nathan Mitchner for making the IT work. We have had 3 or 4 practice meetings, worked out a lot of bugs. They have been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, and any smoothness that happened today was as a result of their efforts. And finally, to thank Ernie Hood, who every round is our science writer and provides the minutes that you see, and we appreciate his input. And that's all I have. I'll turn it back over to Rick then to close it up if you'd like.
Okay, Pat. Well, thank you for acknowledging. Thank you for all of the work you put into this, which I know was considerable, as well as all of your colleagues and all members of council. So thanks everyone for your participation in this very productive meeting. So I will use my virtual and officially declare that this meeting is adjourned. So hope to see you all sometime, hopefully in person at some point. But if not, in September, we'll see you virtually. Have a good day, everyone, and
Stay safe.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye.
Great to see you.
Everyone.
Well, thank you.
Stay
Bye.
safe.
Patrick.
Bye.